company called Anchor IS. We design secure accounting software. At least that's what we tell the stockholders. We actually have a lot of fun doing this sort of thing normally. This is Ryan Russell. He joined us about 4 months ago? 5 months ago?
December 2nd.
2 years ago? When we, you want to just advance through this guy, or how do you want to? When we started talking about strike back a couple of years ago, or a year ago, it generated a lot of controversy. It basically all got started when we got really sick and tired of defending ourselves against NMDA-infected boxes and Code Red-infected boxes where we had worms running on operating systems that had been long since patched, long since fixed, publicized, everybody knew about it, and yet people were still bringing infected boxes to the net or putting infected boxes, or putting destined to be infected boxes on the net, getting them infected and attacking us. We came up with a system where we could strike back at these attacking systems. Our goal was to conform to some legal standard. We embraced the concept. It was basically done under the auspices of self-defense, where we could claim damages, we could measure bandwidth utilization, and there were a number of things that we could do to identify specific damages that were occurring in the defense of Code Red and NMDA, even if we weren't actually vulnerable to these worms. Even if our systems were patched, it still takes bandwidth. It takes system processes. It takes administrative time. We didn't want to necessarily have to call people. We didn't want to necessarily have to report to ISPs. We tried that and it never worked. Never get anything out of people. So we came up with a strike back, which by design would use the attack vector of the worm itself that was attacking us in order to pop the box and install code to cease the attacking process. Minimal force. From a technical standpoint, it had a lot of merit. However, there was this group of people who were really unhappy with us doing that. Who were they? Oh, the government. Because it's illegal. We're basically executing code on a machine that we don't own. So we're still kind of in the throes of trying to see where we can go with strike back from an external, untrusted internet strike back standpoint. But in the process of all of this, we spoke with different people who, though didn't think the strike back would ever be anything that we could do on the internet. In conversation with those people and some of the security professionals here, we identified the value of such a system to be deployed on one's internal network, kind of like IDS with a vengeance, if you will. So, building on the technical concepts of strike back, we went ahead and designed this system that we call the enforcer, or enforcer, as our lawyers want us to call it. Now, Black Hat normally does not do corporate they do corporate sponsorships, but they don't allow corporate presentations and things of that nature. But strike back was really born out of Black Hat. I think we originally did it for the Black Hat Vegas. That's when we first did it. And we did it again in Singapore. So we thought it would really be appropriate to do our product launch here. Now, I'm not going to get into money. I'm not going to try to sell you anything unless you want to buy it. Meet me outside over there. But what we want to do is really talk about the technical aspects of strike back. Mr. Russell, would you? We always manage to configure a system, and we being the collective we and more the corporate we, configure systems that in some manner or another are vulnerable to worms. This really isn't a virus issue for us. There's plenty of products in the market that handle viruses. Symantec, Trend Micro, there's a million of them. It's an extremely lucrative business. So what we've done is kind of design Strikeback to specifically go after worms. Slammer, for instance. Many corporate networks, I guess 80,000 was the final?
At least 80,000 machines.
At least 80,000 machines were infected by a worm that required an unpatched system to be available from the internet on ports that were not used. So some of that came through vendor VPNs. Some of that came through internal development systems that may have had a couple of connections to the net or what have you. But 80,000 machines kind of shows that this is an issue. It's very easy for us to talk about how the proper way to secure a network is, the proper way to design a firewall, patch your systems, do this and do that. It's a much different thing to actually do that. So even though we have all of the policies in place, firewall maintenance and all of that, we have worms that loose themselves on the internal network, or we get infected and then they go nuts. We can't manually stamp these worms out. In fact, by the time an administrator is even alerted to the fact that something is happening, in most cases, all the infectable internal assets are already infected. Slammer did its 99.9% of its propagation inside of 15 minutes. So it's impossible to track these things down and to manually fix or patch or stop your systems. And of course, the worst thing is that you're advertising your own ability to the rest of the world. Next. So what we're talking about is to try to detect worm activity. There's a number of ways that we do that. Currently, this is signature-based. The issue with signature-based is we obviously have to know about it to begin with. We couldn't have stopped Slammer with a signature-based system because by the time we knew what was going on, everyone who could be infected was infected. But we have different ways that we're going to detect worm activity. We're currently working on an anomalous traffic detection system that will allow us to identify the traffic patterns created from worm activity. It's a rather ambitious goal for us, but I think it's something that we can do. I think from a normal IDS standpoint, trying to identify anomalous behavior and take action on it is probably a pretty hard thing to do. But from a worm propagation standpoint, it's something that we're relatively confident that we'll be able to design an algorithm that would do the job for us. So we're going to detect the worm activity. We're going to be able to determine the ownership of the infected hosts. We have in this environment, it's obvious that everything is on the same subnet for the demos, but we will have a DNS-based, DNS-esque system that we'll be able to use to determine what internal business groups own particular resources. That's valuable because now that the box is inside, we can do whatever we want to the box. Before, when we were talking about Strikeback on the internet and we needed to conform to the concept of minimal force, we were very limited in what we could do or what we were proposing to do. I know everybody wanted to make the other box burst into flame, right? Because we're so sick of these people attacking us, but we can't do that legally. Here, it's our corporate asset. We can do whatever we want to do, for the most part. Now, and the reason that we mentioned determine ownership of the infected host is that different business groups may or may not want different things to happen. But particularly like government installations, things of that nature. You don't necessarily want to take out a particular department's system or else they'll just actually take you out, period. So Being able to determine ownership of an infected host gives us the ability to determine an extent of action to take against the box. Based on that, we can check rules. So we can say, hey, this is a development box that's over here. We can shut that box down and notify someone to come and fix it. This is a production level box. We can't reboot it. We can't do anything. But we can block an outbound port that the virus, that the worm, Harlan would be mad at me if I called it a virus, that the outbound port is using. So we have this rich rule base that will allow us to determine appropriate actions to take based on ownership and location, things of that nature. Also based on the role of the machine. So it's how do I say it without, let me dance over that point. I'll get back to it when I can think about a way of saying it that won't upset people. Once we determine that a particular host is infected, our signature rules tell us what the infection is, what the worm is. So we can either exploit or log into the host. That's the other benefit of being on an internal infrastructure, is before we had to use the vector that the original worm used, pop the box in that way. It was all unauthenticated. In the case of Slammer, Slammer's a really good example. Slammer, it didn't close the port, but the nature of the UDP 1334 SQL Server multiple instance listener, the nature of that buffer overflow closed the vector. So as soon as that box was popped, I could no longer go in 1434 and pop it again unless it was restarted. So there needs to be an alternate means for us to load code, install our agent software on a host, and that's where our authorization infrastructure comes into play. So we really have this rich collection of rules from which we can determine an appropriate action. We can say, it's NIMDA, it's on a development machine, we can use the original vector, pop the box, shut it down, whatever we want to do. It's a production SQL server. We're going to need to take authenticated access, unless we could identify some other worm, like the hello bug. We could probably use that. But we're going to demo authorized access to the box, where we'll use a number of means to either shut the box down, block the outbound port, dynamic injection of IPsec rules if it's the appropriate operating system type, things of that nature. So we install the agent, and the agent mitigates the infection to the degree that we've told it to. We decided to, who all knows that I'm a big Microsoft guy? Well, I'm a big Microsoft guy. We wrote this tool under Linux. And the reason that we did that is we wanted to base this technology on very well understood, very well tried, very well debugged technologies like Snort, different IDS technologies. So we're going to take advantage of some of these IDS technologies. Though this is not an IDS system per se, we're going to take advantage of those already out there, tried and true technologies. Signatures are very easy in this case. In the anomalous traffic detection, it'll have to base its response on percentage of unique hosts being called off net, a spike in activity, sheer traffic, a number of different qualifications for that. But in this case, signatures are easy. All we have to do is get IDS to output in real time, and it's small, and Snort is great. Who uses Snort? Well, that's great if you know. Next, please. We have a very rich and verbose logging system. Whenever we get into the architecture of the system, it's actually multiple modules. In this case, those modules are all executed, daemons running on the same system. But once you see the architecture, we can spread the sensors out and spread these modules out all over the place. We have very rich logging, so we can really identify what's happened at multiple points whenever we do a strike back internally. We can combine that with our DNS system to know even if we're going to fix a box. So we could be in an infrastructure, we could have a worm that is infected in a business unit that we don't have any permission to take action on. So using our little DNS system or our rule base, we'll know whether we'll be able to do anything with that box. And we need rules for what kind of action we're going to take. We kind of talked about that. Next, please. When we can use the same exploit as the worm uses to pop the box, we obviate a lot of concerns, one being authorization, the other being speed and a method of authentication. This allows us to be very quick in our response if we can use the same or similar exploit. Well, we know that going in, and we can all make a decision. The other thing is that with a configurable rule base, we'll be able to identify whether or not we're going to take authorized access based on an IP address, or whether we're just going to impulsive stuff, don't worry about that, or whether or not we're going to take authenticated credentials. So just because it's NIMDA doesn't mean we have to use the original vector, but we may or may not. Next. We install the agent in real time. We've been thinking about having the agent listening all the time. And there are some positives to that, but there are also some negatives to that. We're still adding and developing to this process, obviously. But right now, we install the agent in real time. Once that agent is installed, it connects back to the dispatcher and asks for instructions. So once we know the box is infected, load the agent, it calls back for instructions. That might include firewalling or rebooting, claiming mutexes. In NIMDA, the way that NIMDA works is to instantiate a mutually exclusive object. It creates a handle to this mutually exclusive object. It's a named mutex. The nature of a named mutex in system memory is that only one can exist in system-wide memory at a time. So we can leverage that with NIMDA by claiming that name before NIMDA does and keep NIMDA from ever running. So the machine may be infectable, it may be infectious, it might not be patched, but you'll still never be able to load NIMDA on it if we claim the mutex. We can really do anything that we want. Full remote patch installation as well. The current version doesn't do that. We're kind of in, not negotiations, we're exploring what companies we can work with to take advantage of their patch technology. There's already a number of companies out there that do remote patch management. It'd be kind of silly for us to reinvent the wheel on that. So though this version of it doesn't do full patch installation, that's a capability that we're going to have. So the agent logs to the central station at each step, so we know everything that's been done to that unit. Next, please. Our job is kind of hard here. We don't have a lot of room to make a mistake. The worm writer, if only 50% of the time it works, he could still have a tremendously successful worm. Well, we can't. We need to be able to react with a almost 100% certainty that this system is going to be infected, or effective, Freudian slip. Our resources are much more robust, what we need. We can't write an agent necessarily in 376 bytes like Slammer was. Very tiny. And we have to care about having permissions to do things, and worms don't. So it's like an uphill battle whenever we're talking about combating worms, particularly Slammer, which was just so propagated so incredibly fast, and the traffic created by Slammer was enormous. Has anyone watched a network sniff and infected a box with Slammer? It's incredible. Immediately goes from 1,000 bits per second or whatever to 30,000 attempts per second. It's an amazing, well, it's code that does what it's supposed to do. They'll always have some lead time over us. This is why it's important for us to get to work on this anomalous traffic detection. Even if you had a strike-back system enforcer in place the Friday night before Slammer hit, really wouldn't have done us a lot of good. Granted, come Saturday morning, we had a complete analysis of it, and we actually knew it was coming anyway. Not because we knew who did it, but the SQL Server UDP code, I actually, when Mr. Litchfield was sick, I demoed it for him in Singapore. It had worm written all over it. So we knew it was going to happen, and in this case, we had already analyzed what we would do when this worm hit. It wasn't an if. We wrote about it hitting. We wrote about this exact occurrence 6 months before it happened. So in that case, we knew how to combat it almost immediately. But still, they have to be analyzed. We have to have a strategy for neutralization. So they've got a one-up on us. Please. And we have to be able to quickly distribute IDS rules. So if we have multiple sensors, we need a methodology to be able to update those sensors very quickly and all at the same time. Code that contains exploits for each new worm also has to be upgraded. So in other words, if we dispatch an agent and then request that agent to take action, we're going to have to load the exploits. Whenever we, Code Red for instance, we use Code Red to kill Code Red. We use the same exploit. So if we're analyzing a new worm and we're going to do that process, we're going to use the worm itself, the exploit vector of that worm to do it, we're going to need to upgrade that as well. And the agent should be flexible to handle most situations. That's why we upload it every time. The other reason we upload the agent every time as opposed to just having an agent sitting there listening is we want to mitigate the possible misuse of that agent. If that agent is told to do something and it's sitting there on the box, there is an introduction of an entirely new class of security issue right there. Because we have an agent that's capable of knocking out boxes in your infrastructure. So we don't want that guy just laying around. So there's an extraction method as well. Next, please. So the value here is the enforcer system is constantly maintained. And we have, right now we load it manually, but we're developing a structure in which we can have real-time data updates, some very rich controls on how we maintain IDS signatures, how we maintain the roles, how we maintain the exploits used, things of that nature. The architecture itself, we've got basically 5 modules going on here. We have a sensor, and we've separated these out, obviously, on purpose. The sensor's job is merely to detect whether it's anomalous traffic behavior, whether it's a worm signature. The signature's job is simply to detect. We have a manager that accepts these. It detects and reports to its manager what it's found, and then it's done its job. The manager basically is responsible for accepting communications from all the sensors, updating its console, which can be a number of things. We have a screen console, syslog console, web-based console, which is basically going to be used for configuration. The manager will be talking to its console so as we can let people know what's going on. And then the manager will be talking to the dispatcher. The manager also is the one who loads the agent out there and then tells the dispatcher what to tell the agent, and then the agent accepts that communication. The reason that we modularize this so much is in cases like Slammer, where you have a tremendous outflow of traffic immediately, this allows us to distribute the components across a network where they'll be best served. Next, please. So basically, we've got all of our sensors. Those sensors talk to the manager, updates console. Console can then update other console elements, like I said, syslog or whatever, so as other people can be informed of what's going on. It communicates with the dispatcher, who loads the agent on the infected system, and then the agent receives the instructions on what to do. It might look a little complicated, but the architecture here is very, very fast. Next, please. We have our own, can you hit P?
Say what?
Hit the letter P, as in previous. See, now I forgot what I was going to say. We have our own proprietary protocols that we use for these communications, by the way. These communications will be secured so that when the agent is dispatched and receives its communication on what's going on, those communications will be secure. So as people will have less likely chance of being able to inject processes in the middle, things of that nature. And if you have people who are going to do that and they're inside your network, then you have bigger problems anyway. That's one of the other advantages of this type of system. Okay, next. So the sensor is a standard snort plugin. We've written our own output plugin, obviously, to support the proprietary protocol that Ryan designed. And then it logs each alert to the manager for processing. It also logs to itself. So we wanted to make sure that if in some strange occurrence something didn't quite go right, we'll have the ability of doing log correlation to really find out exactly what happened. We have snort will log to itself. The manager will also log to itself. Next, please. So the manager receives the alert information for the sensor. It sends the commands to the dispatcher, communicates with the console, tells us what's going on, and contains all the logic to determine what we're going to do. So if we're going to dispatch something, that's when the dispatcher needs to know about it. If not, it'll say, oh, that guy's okay, we're not going to do anything. Or we're going to contact the system administrator. Or we're going to do a host of other things. We're going to page a couple of people. But we won't take action, or we will take action. And that's where the rules come into play for what the response method is. Console, basic console, tells you what's going on. Next, please. So the dispatcher, it takes the commands. It takes the information on who it's going to dispatch a strike back against. That's why it's important to have this information secured. It exploits the box. In other words, it'll pop it, or it'll actually log on to it to take authorized access. And then it monitors the agent progress so as it knows if what we've done has worked. Next, please. The agent itself contacts the dispatcher once it's been uploaded, and then it follows its instructions. It receives the commands from the dispatcher and then executes those commands. So the agent's really a stub. The agent, we load the agent, but it's what's on the local box that allows us to take the action that we need. So it stubs itself, says, hey, I'm here, what do I do? And the dispatcher says, do this. And it does it. Now, hopefully all this stuff will work, or else we'll be walking home. So what we're going to do here, can we, you got this guy up? We're first going to do NIMDA. Okay. We've got a Windows 2000 Pro box. We loaded IIS on it. And we're going to infect it with NIMDA. In this case, we're going to use the agent is going to use our named mutex exploit against NIMDA. So once we infect this box with NIMDA, we will sense it, dispatch it, the manager will dispatch it, we'll load the stub, and we will load our code that will instantiate these named mutexes before NIMDA does, and then we're going to reboot the machine. Normally people go, oh my God, you're going to reboot the machine, which is what we do on the internet whenever they attack us, what we proposed to do. Of course, we never would really do something like that. He would. So we will reset the machine, and then when that machine comes back up, it can't get NIMDA anymore. And the beauty here is that whatever role that machine was serving, it still serves that role. So let's go ahead and now, where are we with...
Now, NIMDA's, this box is already infected. I've basically paused it.
Okay, right.
So NIMDA's, in flagrante here.
If you have loaded NIMDA on purpose on a computer, which, I mean, I guess it's possible. We do it. It takes a while for it to get rolling. NIMDA sits in memory for a little while. It's not like Slammer. The second that Slammer executes, it's off and running. NIMDA, the box chews on NIMDA for a little while before it starts propagating. So what we've done here is, rather than me have to tell a joke that you may have heard before, we went ahead and paused this session. So do we want to show the NIMDA traffic, or do we just want to? I mean, if we could pull up you've got T ethereal. Why don't you go ahead and resume that guy? We've loaded NIMDA on this box now. We'll bring it up so we can see it reboot. All right, now it's saying, who is this? Who is this? Bring it up quick. So it is now trying to attack all of these other systems. Do you have the manager running?
Yes.
So we have already identified, and we missed a little bit of it, we have already identified this attack. This connection refused is okay. What we've done is we've used a privilege escalation tool to, using the same vector that NIMDA uses, we have loaded our code on the box. We have escalated to local administrator on this box. We have then changed the boot sequence of the box, loaded our own code on it, and now we're going to tell it to reboot itself. Now we're going to tell it to reboot itself.
It's going, relax.
I know. I just get all excited. I want to watch it. Ha 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 ha! He dies. Sorry, I just love that. So, internal assets got NIMDA. We popped the box without authentication. Based on a certain rule set, we know that we can do that to this box. When he comes back up again, obviously it's stopped because he's rebooting. Let's let him reboot and then infect it with NIMDA again, even though it's already infected. Let's just throw it on there as much as we can and then see if he ever starts to go outbound again. So we'll give this just a second to reboot. Should I tell the joke now? No. There actually is one that I tell all the time. And the reason I think it really applies very well to business, and I know you've all heard it, the two guys camping in the woods. Two guys camping in the woods. Bear comes through, starts tearing the place up. The one guy reaches in his bag and starts putting on his shoes. And his friend's like, what the hell are you doing? You're never going to outrun that bear. And his friend says, I don't have to. I just have to outrun you. And that's really what business is like, particularly in security. We have to be able to outrun the people who are coming in and trying to destroy our networks. And then let the people who are slower than us catch the flag for it. Right? So, I could have made it a little longer. So there are these three guys in the woods. Okay. So let's go ahead and run the text-based ethereal.
Just your normal Windows stuff.
Yeah, that's normal. And let's go ahead and infect him again. Okay. This box has been infected with NIMDA, blah, 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 blah. It's part of the messaging that we can, obviously we can send message alerts off. There's a number of different things that we can do. Sample is the name of the exploit that we wrote, or
That's NIMDA.
Pardon?
Sample is NIMDA.
Sample is, well, it's the different version of NIMDA. This version of NIMDA specifically attacks one C class, and it's really great to have that so we can test stuff. And so he submitted it to some of the virus people who said, you realize you just told us that you modified a virus or a worm. So you can see nothing's happening now. Can you go to this machine? Do you know its IP?
go to it how?
Can you like open up a browser on your VIO and then point it at that guy? Just to show that there's, so even though it's infected with NIMDA, it's not attacking anyone anymore. /. And so we get our under construction. So the box, though infected with NIMDA, it's not infecting anybody more, serving its purpose. It's doing whatever it was doing before. So, and people have been notified and are running over to beat the administrator in the head or whoever did it right. Okay, so now we're going to do something a little different. We're going to infect this box with code red. Can we power him off completely? Isn't that what we want to do?
Yeah, give me a sec to reset the code red.
Okay. Restarting the box might not be an option for us. Number of reasons. I mean, you might not want to bring the box down. So with our code red piece, and it's not that we have to do this with code red. This is just an example. What we're going to do here is rather than instantiating a named mutex, something that's very, very specific just to this worm like NIMDA, what we're going to do in the case of code red is to dynamically inject an IPsec rule to block the outbound traffic of the worm. So whenever the box is infected with code red, what it does is goes outbound port 80. Well, we all know that we rarely have any reason for a web server to make outbound calls to port 80, unless what it's doing is Windows Update or scheduled virus download or virus definition downloads. And if it's doing that, it wouldn't get code red, right? I mean, if we're using Windows Update. So in this case, we've identified the, that's nice.
Oh, give me a sec. And I know you've got more than one joke.
Yeah, but not all the rest of them are really distasteful.
I'm just used to it, I think, by now.
Yeah. So here what we're going to do is identify the attack, and we're still going to use the original attack vector that code red did. Now, to inject an IPsec rule in a box, you have to have administrator access. We're not going to use any authentication for this. We're going to go to the box, we're going to escalate privileges with some exploits that allow us to do that. And then we're going to inject an IPsec rule blocking outbound 80. The box will stay up, and it'll just stop attacking people. And of course, it'll alert the National Guard or whatever your infrastructure dictates that this is going on. Okay. Wait. Sorry, I don't need to tell you that. I'm embarrassed now.
Okay. I didn't want to say anything, but I think they saw it.
Okay. Normally this would be Windows 2000 Server. We can load IIS on Pro just as well. It boots up a little faster. Now, we have our own, this is different. This isn't actually part of Enforcer, but we have our own base of exploits to where we can infect whatever boxes we want to infect, however we want to infect them. So as people have their wireless up, you see, oh, code red that guy, and NIMDA that guy, slammer this person. So this is what this tool is. This is our own, Ryan's own tools that he wrote to exploit these boxes. So he's going to infect this system over here. Whoa.
I forgot something.
Oh.
I screwed up. Stall.
So these 4 guys are in the woods. This is where I would have given away something, but I don't really have anything to give away. So how long do I have to stall run it?
Oh, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
Should I go ahead and infect it?
Yeah, so again, we're going to infect the box, and then we're going to take unauthenticated access to it, escalate privileges. You'll see this is the infection taking place here. Now, it's the 20 code red. Is it infecting the White? Is it DOSing the White House?
Yes.
Who's familiar with code red and what it does? It actually does different things based on what day it is. And this is the time of the month for code red where it is going to try to, once it's infected, it's going to try to DDoS the White House. So you'll see here in a minute. Or did we already catch it too? Did we?
Yeah, it hasn't started yet.
Takes it a minute to ramp up. And this is the worm's fault. It's not my fault. See, Slammer. See, we need more worms like Slammer. You're going to edit that out, right? Okay. No, that's normal traffic.
See, the worm knows we're giving a demo.
Yeah. That's not funny.
No. Let's try it again.
Yeah, why don't you infect him? Did the infection work? Do you know how to pop a box? It's code red. Come on. See, that's how good this system is. It actually prevents the worm from infecting the box in the first place. Thank you. Good night. So what do you suggest we do here? Do you have IIS running on that system?
Yeah.
David, could you exploit this box for us real quick? So we're waiting for code red to actually do its thing. And bring up the console so we can see if something's going on that end, or can you already see that he's not?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, it's not going to do a thing till it sees.
Pardon? It actually hard codes the IP in there, so we'd at least see it trying to ARP it.
We do have a route. Well, it thinks it's got a route out to the rest of the world.
Okay. Okay. Why don't we, since code red is not doing what we want it to do, do you want to show them how we'll respond to Slammer?
I got to change the code a little bit.
Okay. Let's do this. Why don't you reset
Yeah, I've reset the VMware image. Try it again.
reset your VMware image? Because I'd really like for you guys to see this. Pardon? Well, it's code red giving us the hard time. Our system works fine. It's code red that's not working. Oh, do you? Do you want to try it on his? No, let's not do that. IP scheme. This is a, I appreciate it though. We're going to show Slammer here in a minute. Mr. Litchfield is the one who discovered the vulnerability in SQL Server that Slammer used. So let's reboot this guy, and we'll just try it one more time. One of the problems with live demos that are actually live demos as opposed to pre-canned code that makes it look like we're doing what we're doing. You powered it off and discarded?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I guess we just got this particular copy of code red fairly intimidated already or something. I don't know.
It knows we're going to slam it. All right, let's make sure that the can you refresh the under construction thing just to make sure that he is in fact listening? All right, so he is listening. Is that the right IP?
Yep. So
Okay.
I just refreshed in the browser there.
All right. Interesting feeling I have right now as I'm waiting for this thing to infect. That's just us trying to infect it with code red again. Are you getting all this, by the way? Just making sure. Yeah. I don't think your exploit works so good.
Just a copy of regular code red. That one I didn't change.
All right. So let's do this. Let's bring up the, you've got this box ready for Slammer, right?
To infect it, this one here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why don't you infect it? How long is it going to take for you to switch that over since we're out of sequence?
Oh, 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. Why don't you, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing here with Code Red. So with Code Red, the intention was if the worm actually gave us any support. Did this happen when you walked in? No. Sit down. Yeah, well, we had it
I've run this one about 100 times.
about, yeah,
Normally
you know how.
within 60 seconds we're good.
It's the typical do it 19,000 times before you walk into the room, and then when you walk into the room, it's not going to work. So the main, and that's okay. I mean, it's basically the same technology that we deployed against NIMDA. Rather than resetting the box, we used privilege escalation to inject the IPsec rule. Now we're going to do something similar here, except with SQL Slammer, we're limited in what we can do. One, the vector is closed. There's no way for me to pop the box over 1434 again once it's already infected. So that's out. Though we could use some other exploits to take control of that box, what I want to do here is actually use authenticated access. So we've got basically the ability for the dispatcher to seize a username and password that's been configured, username and password on the system, that will then use that to authenticate to the box and then take whatever action that we want. In Code Red, it was unauthenticated, but we were going to privilege escalation and block out bound 1434. And we can do that here as well. But we wanted to show something a little bit more dramatic than just blocking an outbound port. Yes, it would stop the traffic, but in the case of SQL Slammer, the box is pretty much useless. Not only is the network utilization spiked at 30,000 bits per second, or whatever it is, but the CPU cycles have been almost exhausted by the worm itself. So in this case, we're going to take some very drastic action. This is our burst into flame action. I mean, it sounds a lot more exciting than what it really is. But if we have a worm, it's loosed on our network, we can take authenticated access to shut that machine down, something that we couldn't do in the internet-based tool. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to infect the box. I'm going to show, can we show them some of the traffic that's created? You got that look on your face.
Yeah. Our victim decided not to talk on the network.
Really?
Yep.
Is it plugged in?
Seems to be got link. Having a great demo here.
Yeah. Yeah, this is when giving away vodka would have been nice. Plug it in, plug the Ethernet cable into it. Thank you. That's what I'm here for.
You didn't tell me you had 2 jacks on.
Yeah, there's 2 Ethernet cables on that guy. Now can you get it?
Yeah.
Were you sitting up there the whole time? Freaking out?
No, just right then when you said take it away.
Okay. So I'd like to show some of the traffic. Okay.
All right, let's, so I got Ethereum running,
Okay.
and I'm about to infect it here, down here.
Sure you are. Whoa.
This will
See
work
now
fine.
how quickly, that's Slammer. That's how quickly. This is a single box. So even though, now you've got the listener turned off? You don't have the listener turned off, it's just not working?
Yep.
Okay, this part is our fault. You want to try it again, or
Sure.
you want a little bit more time? What we've noticed, and this is, I don't know if you heard us earlier, we were kind of talking about the nature of Slammer. When you have this much network utilization going on, it's hard to get to the box. So we've been working on a couple of different ways in order to ensure that we can retry these attempts to pop the box authenticated. And some of these attempts, obviously, we're still working on. But that's the challenge. And I think for us, I mean, it hit it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it immediately identified it. You know, you should have had your foot on the power cord.
Well, go and explain to him what the problem is there.
What, with Slammer?
Yeah, Slammer's pegged the CPU on the SQL Server box to the point where it's not responding remotely most of the time.
So that's one of the, we were hoping here, and particularly on this network where we've got a direct connection between the two machines and it's taking up as much bandwidth as it can. I mean, that's just an excuse though. You know, ultimately this is our challenge. And we had it working, and in all fairness to Ryan, so as you don't think it looks like he's not doing what he's doing, I pulled this on him pretty much at the last minute. So this is basically my fault why this doesn't work. And that's the nature of Slammer. This is the stuff that we need to concentrate on. The code reds, the NIMDAs are basically pretty easy. When you have something that can replicate over a UDP packet that doesn't require a connection, this machine can dedicate its entire process to just trying to infect people. So what would have happened had this worked is that the dispatcher would have given the information to the manager would have looked this box up, we would have known that it was SQL Slammer, we would have known that there's no vector that we can use to attack back. So it would access its internal authorization infrastructure, get a username and password that it can use to alternately load code on this box. And then we would start that process to, hey, did
No,
you?
I stopped it.
You just stopped it. And it finally works. Thank you. Good night. So, and that was the goal there. So, yes, sir. Thank you.
In the case of Slammer, why wait for a worm to infect you? If you already know the bug, and as yours and Lisco as I mentioned, had bug with no low print, why not attack in the sense? Maybe not necessarily attack and catch, but why not attack and somehow defend first rather than waiting?
What do you mean?
Whatever your measure is to stop worms like this from infecting, whether it's patch, stop outbound port connections, or whatever the case may be, why wait for a worm? Why not just
Because
use the bug, attack, and close it? Since Slammer closes it, why not you can close it as well?
Well, then we would have to go through, so this is part of standard infrastructure defense. Hopefully, I mean, in all likelihood, in all reality, we don't want to need a tool like this, right? I mean, we want to have patch management to the degree that as soon as a vulnerability is discovered, that we patch our systems. You know, we would like to have our firewall infrastructure set so that unneeded services aren't reachable by the internet. And even if they were, that their outbound services aren't made available. So this is kind of one of the, I mean, when you say, why wait for it? I mean, what else are we, I mean,
Well,
other than part of a comprehensive scan of the network to determine infectable hosts. And the other thing is that, you know, we all have our laptops here, and we're at Black Hat. You know, some people can go back to their offices and forget that they were doing testing or whatever, and that they've got code red on their machine or something like that. A visitor comes in to your network, and your boss tells you to give them internet access, and they do something. So,
I guess I was just commenting that Slimer did a pretty good job of stopping the infection. Like you said, it stopped you from, going in after Slimer and doing so. Since you know the book, I mean, couldn't you do the same thing as Slimer? The only bad part about Slimer is it starts making outbound connections. So it's almost appears that you can make it yourself a worm, and but not be malicious about it on your own corporate networks.
well, and I mean, you can, but I mean, basically the point here is to be able to combat worms that, multiple service worms that do different things, and to be able to take action both authenticated and unauthenticated. Really what our goal is to be able to identify the best case scenario and how to combat internal worm infestation.
Sure, you're not going to be able to predict every single.
And we're not going to be able to predict every single one. But I mean, that's what I'm actually excited about the anomalous traffic detection. Apparently we've got a little bit more work to do before we jump right into that, just on the regular traffic detection. But in that instance, we would be able to identify traffic spikes of X% within X amount of time and analyze that traffic intelligently. I mean, in the case of Slammer, it would have been very easy to do. We would know that we had 3,000% increase in outbound traffic all to this one port. And even more importantly, we know if the asset is an internal asset. We'll know if this thing should be making calls off net. Our internal SQL servers don't need to make any call off net to get their job done, unless they don't. So a couple of things would be present there. Making off-net calls, 3,000% increase, and we know that the outbound destination port is always the same. Bingo. So the dispatcher analyzes that, takes authenticated access against that box, and blocks that outbound port. In that case, we wouldn't shut the machine down. But it's up to you. You'll get to design the rules. Yes, sir.
With authenticated access, aren't you setting yourself up for someone to steal the action?
No more than you are by taking authenticated access to resources on the internal network anyway.
Not really.
Why?
If you were sitting on a switch network where the guy's not going to be able to pull the hash off the wire, now with a single UDP packet, you can send in the hash.
We wouldn't send the hash over UDP in this case.
No, for sure, but if I try to send you a UDP export, you try to log in to me, right? The credentials I can potentially use elsewhere in the network.
Well, but my point is that there would be no difference between myself as a user logging into the SQL server and those credentials being passed and somebody being able to take advantage of those credentials. I don't understand the difference. This is just authenticated access to the box, just like authenticated access to your normal SQL servers or to some file share or to Exchange server. Is that not?
What you're asking is that, like, you're evil and you walk into my parking lot with your wireless card and you start attacking my machines, and now automatically I'm trying to log into you, and so now I get to grab your hand. That seems to be the word.
Yeah, but the point is, if you can infect the SQL box, you don't need to find an
Right.
I'm not going to connect to SQL.
Oh, right, sure.
I'm going to put up my Linux box and listen on 139 and send you the UDP exploit. You're going to try to log into me to load your cache and load the pages and send me a hash that I can use elsewhere on the network.
Well, how are you going to get on my internal network anyway?
Say wireless.
Wireless, it's your office box that you're doing internet.
Well, then, so here's my point. If you can do that, you can do what, I mean, then and you're right. Could that happen? If you come into my facility and you have physical access, then, then can you do it? Yes. Can you do a million other things? Yes.
I guess the other one.
So,
Maybe your maybe your new IP isn't one of the protected hosts on the network.
I mean, if you're on my network, you come in your wireless, you identify what my machines are, and you pretend like you're infected. One, I already know roles, I already know what machines are where. Remember our little DNS system? It's going to be a robust system, because in the same way that you have records telling you, like an MX record or a host record or an A record or a name record or a start of authority record, we can have role records as well. So there's a number of ways that we can do some checks like that. But in that case, you wouldn't go through all of that trouble to crack that hash. And so what? So you get, what are you going to do? You're going to chew on it for 3 months and then come back and do what?
That's the rest of your machine.
Yeah, you come in back with. So, any other questions about the nice blue screen we have up here? Please ask some, because I wanted to show you some other things. Because I want it to look good in front of the man who owns the company that we've just made fools in front of. Yes, sir.
Why did you not take the approach of exporting the SQL Server through the hello button?
We actually mentioned that, and we could certainly try to take advantage of some secondary or even tertiary means of owning a box with unauthenticated, using an unauthenticated method of owning the box. The question was, David, he said, well, if it's infectable by Slammer, why not just use the hello bug? And that may be one of the things that we have built into the analysis. It's like, okay, this is Slammer. What are we going to do? Well, if they got Slammer, we know they can do this hello bug and then do it that way. And the reason that we didn't do that in this, maybe we should have. The reason we didn't in this demo was to show an opportunity to use authenticated access. So, and that's what we did with NIMDA. That's what we did with, with Code Red, if Code Redded.
So, enterprises and corporations are one thing. Are we, as DSL users and other home users, are we going to start seeing this kind of thing in our terms of service? Our ISPs are going to be since we're on their network, striking against us and things like that.
I hope so, to be very honest. The question was, hang on a second, Steve. The question was, did everybody hear the question? Are we going to start to see in our terms of service with our ISPs a clause in there that says that they have the opportunity or they have the right to use one of these methods of dispatch? And one, because I'm a capitalist, I'll say, yeah, I hope that we have that clause, because that means that the ISPs are buying my product. See, they even heard it. But even outside of my product, our product, if we do see something like that, I think it's going to represent that the ISP is starting to accept a certain amount of, if not responsibility, they're going to accept a certain amount of authority on what goes on their network.
What they already do now is blocking ports and stuff. It's, and they feel their bandwidth, their cache.
Well, and I can understand, because what they want to do is protect all of their customers from, something that a smaller percentage of their customers have done. They want to protect the integrity of their product just like anybody else. And it would be something that you could see. I think this would be valuable. The ISPs would be able to take, some action in that regard. Now, whether it's direct action against that person's system rather, I don't know. but it may be a similar sort of a rule set update in their firewall that would block that person's traffic and still maintain control of, do it in their own infrastructure rather than trying to run code on that person's box. But it's certainly,
I'm sure those ISP administrators are every bit as sick as we are about seeing that.
whenever we did I wrote a couple of articles on strikeback technology, and a number of ISPs, straight out asked me for the code. They said, hey man, can I have it, because these people do it and I don't care if they get pissed or not. Because they're as tired of it as anyone else. Anyone? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Steve had his. Steve.
Have you thought about just telling workers to shut down the closest port they're attached to? Switch ports, they just disable the port they're attached to?
We have. My issue with that was now whenever we start having equipment configure other pieces of equipment as opposed to an end user box, then we have to get involved with, you as a vendor of Cisco equipment and things of that nature and find out and it's something that we thought about. But I think, the level of integration with the infrastructure in that regard, I personally wasn't too interested in going there. It's easier for us to do this, and it's faster for us to do this. And the other thing that, remember, if we just shut off the port, then we have killed all access to that machine. And that's true. Maybe it is our only, which is what with the system shutdown, right?
Maybe it's another option as far as the ISP's concerned, where they may not necessarily want to touch your box, but they're not going to allow you past the point that you essentially violated the terms of service by being infected. Therefore, you're going to shut off all your cache.
That might get around illegalities, I guess.
What, just shutting down the whole thing?
Well, they don't touch your machine, they cut your port, so there's no illegalities or anything.
I could see that on an ISP basis, probably a little more than on an internal infrastructure basis.
For an ISP, that's a little more realistic because they've got a much better map of what IP addresses live in what ports. If you start talking about doing it in an enterprise, you can do interesting things like, you go searching for the MAC address, you find it, shut off that port, and oops, you actually shut off a port that's got a whole other set of switches hanging off of it, and you cut off a whole building. So, there's, some things that are scary.
Ideally, we'll be able to use things like IPsec blocking an outbound port that still leaves the resource of that machine open. Remote patch would also be, something. So, personally, I would think that total isolation of the system, be it a switch block, a router rule, system shutdown, I would use those as a last resort, because then we can't get to the box's administrators to do something. But if it was a case of, I would rather my machines be shut down and an administrator notified in the case of slammer traffic if we were able to identify that beforehand. So we did, I've thought about that. The other issue is like in gigabit, the FX brought up a gigabit switch. There's only one port that you're going to be able to monitor all this, and they're not going to give up their IDS to plug this guy into it. So there are some infrastructure challenges ahead of this. But I think they can all be solved. Yes, sir.
Yeah, your idea for enforcer, grew out of the Armageddon that was around at the time, before Sam.
Yes.
Now, there are a number of people who failed to see the benefits of this kind of product, and were basically, I hate the term, but poo-poo.
Right.
Okay. Now, do you think that since Slammer, this has gained more acceptance in the wider community, and in terms of needing to change the law, so not only is it an internal tool, but if there's an external box attacking me, how can then use this to take them out?
Probably more because both with NIMDA internal resources were indeed hammered. Code Red, it was more of, I'm messing with other people. Now, when Slammer actually took down people's infrastructure, then and they were made aware of something like this. I don't think people were thinking about how much traffic it was going to be able to generate. And just from a sheer traffic standpoint, keep systems unavailable. I think Slammer has not only, do you have a back end? I'll talk to you about that later. I think Slammer has not only made systems like this at least something people will consider now, but I mean, I think it's also made people aware of how critical, whether it's via enforcer or a proper firewall configuration, how critical some of this infrastructure is now. The interdependencies that we have on networks that nobody thought about, the Bellevue 911 system being taken to manual systems. I don't think we really would have thought about, I mean, what's the guy who's, pardon? Oh, I thought you were flipping me off for a minute. I was like, good grief. The V-Myths guy has always greatly poo-pooed cyber terrorism things and stuff like that. And for the most part, I had as well. I was like, you know, they're going to crash into buildings. They're not going to try to take down a network. But when I spoke directly to a dispatcher at the Bellevue 911 center. I mean, person to person. This wasn't the IT guy. It wasn't their manager. And this person who does the work, takes the calls, once they were on manual systems, every call that came in, they had to write phone numbers down. They had to write names down. They had to collect a lot more information than they would have had to have done in their normal assistance package. And 20 calls down the line, you're now seeing something as a 5 or 10 minute backlog. And she said, most definitely, there could have been a risk to human life because their systems were taken down. And that was sobering. It was like to think about the fact that a human being could have died because of this, you know, really makes you, I mean, even if you had poo-pooed this stuff before, I mean, I think it really does open people's eyes to what is possible in our interdependencies. Yes, the Bellevue system, see, people think that the Bellevue 911 system was connected to the internet. It wasn't. The Bellevue system was connected to the city system. The city system was connected to the internet. When Slammer didn't just take out the 911 facility, it took out the entire city system. Police officers on calls couldn't look up history of a call. And if there was a domestic disturbance, they didn't know if it was the first one or if some guy had, you know, been beating up his kids 30 times before. They didn't have any of this information to them. Payroll was down, all this kind of stuff. So the interdependencies, I think, is what has opened up a lot of people's eyes.
Has there been much lawmaker movement, like at all, verifying or denouncing this sort of technology?
Internally, no. From a legal standpoint, Jeremiah's question was, has there any pushback legally for this product? And it's no. I mean, obviously, our strikeback product, you know, they are utterly and completely against it and have threatened that if I actually release the tool, even, that I might stand to have to defend myself legally. And of course, if I use the tool, that would be illegal. This, of course, is we are using the tool against our own assets. So I already have, though we're exploiting the box without authentication, it's still my resource and I can do whatever I want. So no, I haven't had any backlash about that. Did you fix it? Well, you don't get the red jelly bean. Any other questions? I apologize for that not working. If you were going to buy it and now you're not, don't tell that gentleman right over there, please. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Actually, I still don't understand why do you try to use the same attack vector against the virus? It just means that when a new virus will be just closing this door, which get the system, and you anyway will be necessary to get authenticated
So the question is, why do we use the same attack vector that the worm does when all that, let me paraphrase. When all that's going to do is make the worm riders close the door behind them and then force me to take authenticated access? Well, once they start doing that, then that's whenever I'll start taking authenticated access. History has dictated that the worm riders make things as simple as they can. If they purposefully try to close something behind, if they purposefully try to use raw sockets as opposed to just a standard socket, you know, those are areas of complexity that they've shown that they don't want to do. And I think it's because the purpose of a worm is to propagate, and it's to propagate as quickly as it can. The more people who find out about a worm before it's propagated, the less successful the worm can be. So, Slammer, for instance, it did not source its port from 53, which probably would have made it through, I don't know, I'm completely guessing, I have no statistics on this, but just from firewall configurations that I've seen, people just assume that the response from 53 is a DNS response. So they've set their firewalls up to just allow this through. So if Slammer had configured itself to look like a DNS query, a DNS query response, it probably would have made itself through a lot more firewalls, but it didn't do that. It also didn't use raw sockets. Why? Maybe it's because they knew you needed administrative access on a Windows 2000 box to do raw sockets. Who actually goes through the trouble of configuring a domain or a lower level user to run the SQL Server service to run in? I mean, I do, but most people still use local systems. So that could have, I mean, I think it's because it wasn't necessary. So to kind of try to answer the question quickly, yes, a deployment of a system like this, or even if Strikeback in general is deployed, will it raise the bar for virus writers? And I just don't think so. They're going to do whatever, I think the virus writers are going to do whatever they think will work the best for the most amount of people. In the same way there was a conversation on BugTrack about rebasing your executables, rebasing your DLLs so the get proc address would be different on your machine than it would be programmed into the worm, and how that might mitigate you getting exploited. I thought the idea had merit. A lot of people think it don't have merit, particularly people who have the expertise to figure out how to bypass that. And the thought was that now all the worm writers are going to do is try to brute force the get proc address, or whatever. Is that the right terminology? They're going to try to brute force the get proc address. And they're not going to do that. They're going to do whatever is easiest. They're going to do what is reliable. And to that degree, that's why we take the same attack vector. It's faster. It's also reliable, because we've proven that code works. Like with the NIMDA exploit. That one worked. We didn't have to, in our demo. That's the one that worked, and we use the exact same exploit that NIMDA does. So, I mean, pardon? Right, it'll take more than 15 minutes. Well, in that case, that's when we would use authenticated access. And the anomalous traffic detection system, whenever we determine that the traffic is odd enough, I mean, we can really, with a worm, you're going to be able to tell, particularly Slammer. I mean, the traffic rate went up 3,000%, 30,000%, or whatever it was. And in that case, that's when we would take authenticated access against the box. Authenticated access to an infrastructure has complexities. People don't necessarily want to give an appliance system domain or enterprise domain user credentials. And to the degree that we can keep that from happening, we're going to. I agree. I agree. Yes, sir.
If I understand this right, you're building a tool that
And not so old worms.
and not so old worms, and hopefully some knowledge of what, before the worm is actually released, you're gonna have some predicated knowledge of what type of attack vectors a future worm might use. What actions are you guys gonna take as a company then? Because I hear you billing it as a retaliatory strike measure, if you will.
Yes.
What's gonna, what are you guys doing as a company then to stop somebody from taking your tool and using it as a first strike mechanism with all these built-in attack vectors?
Because the first strike, because the knowledge of the first strike, the code, and the knowledge of using that code is already out there. Code Red is already out there, NIMD is already out there, Slammer is already out there. They have a far greater, they can do far more damage with the original code than they can with our code. Yes, sir.
Well, this gentleman's question in front, I think what would add value to your product is when you see a new pod come out, it's usually months before it runs grid. If you can then write a gate control of the system, shut it down before the run comes, that will add value to your product, basically.
Right.
Now, essentially what he's saying is, well, isn't there inherent within your strike back technology, blueprints for, attacking the box, especially in those unauthenticated.
Exactly, you wouldn't have to write the code anymore because you wrote it for me. All I need to do is grab your code, make your code run against, what I mean?
Right. Similar to products that, like Typhon, right?
Yeah.
all the other vendors and tools, they all work with exposed to multiple systems. They're already completely done. So don't need to rip out somebody else's tools.
Right. For those purposes, there's, a lot more attractive tools for the script kiddies to steal than ours. Core Impact, there's a bunch of them out there.
Well, but I mean, we're talking about
Define what attractive would be then.
as soon,
You're modeling up, years from now, a bunch of worms, that can be pretty attractive.
well, but all that information is already out there. The exploit information is already out there.
Modeled in a nice targeting system as well, that you're advertising.
Well, for one, they'd have to buy the tool from us. Right? And then, I mean, a script kiddie is not going to do that. And somebody who's going to try to use our tool to leverage exploits against systems, I mean, there is a much better and cheaper way for them to do that, and that's to keep their ear to the ground on exploits that are discovered. Like Mr. Litchfield and I had the conversation about would somebody else have discovered the SQL Server issue? Right? And so the mindset is that, sure, there's a bug, somebody's going to find it somewhere. And my thought was, well, he's a little different. I think his brain works differently. So he might find stuff that nobody else is going to find. But once it's found, then the jig is up. So once Once the exploit is discovered and published, particularly when a patch is out, anybody who has the mindset of taking advantage of that vulnerability has the capacity to do so without using my tool. So there's no so far, as much as I'd like to say how elite the tool is going to be, there's nothing built into this tool that will allow an attacker to leverage a vulnerability more than the original vulnerability will, if that made sense. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time, everybody. Thank you very much.